What's up everyone? So this is your second INF 272 tutorial, and this week we're having our first look at JavaScript. So what you'll see on the screen here is where we ended our last tutorial, which was just HTML and CSS, where we had 4 sections of different car types, and in each section we had 3 cars with the different properties of each vehicle. This week we want to, as I said, look at JavaScript a little bit. So what JavaScript does is it's the programming language of the web, and it means you can add some flexibility. You can make your websites a little bit more dynamic. So what we want to try and do today is the following. So what you'll see here is there's 2 things that we want to achieve today. The first thing is with JavaScript to go and change the style of all the price tags that are above 500,000 Rand. Okay, so we can of course go and do that statically using HTML and CSS, but in this tutorial we want to use JavaScript so that you can get used to the notation and the syntax. The second thing we would like to do is to actually go and work out the average price for each of the sections and display it next to the section header, and you can see that there's also a different style that's applied there. Right, let's get straight into it. So the first thing that we need to do is you would need to go and access last week's tutorial as a starting point. The source code for last week's tutorial is available on ClickUp. If you couldn't get it right or didn't have the time to do it yourself, you can use last week's source code and just build on that. Alright, so let's have a look at that. Here we go. So this is the source code, and the first thing that we want to do is to actually start make some space for us to write our JavaScript in. So as you guys know from the class that there's 2 places that you can place your JavaScript. It can either be in an external file or embedded inside of the HTML document, but the preferred way to do it is of course in an external file. So we can just create a new file and save that file in your folder. So this is your current working folder. You can see index.html and style.css there, and we're just going to call it script.js and save that. The .js is the extension that makes this a JavaScript file. You can see in your Visual Studio Code that it also recognizes it as JavaScript. Okay, so there's 2 things that we want to do today. And that is first and foremost that we want to color code the price cells. Alright, and the second thing that we want to do is calculate the average price of sections. Okay. So if we write JavaScript here, for example, alert, this is my JavaScript, we need to link this somehow to the HTML. So the way in which you do that is through adding a script tag with an src that points to that JavaScript. In this case, it's just the path is we are in the same folder, and it is script.js. There's something that we just need to consider here. If we place the script tag in the head of the document, the script will load before all the elements have loaded, and possibly carry out operations on elements that have not yet, when the document isn't ready yet. Also, if you have big pieces or a long list of instructions in your script, it could cause, and all those instructions have to run, it could cause your document to load slower in your browser. So a good convention to follow is to in fact not have the script in the head tag, but to actually place it all the way at the bottom as the last child of your body element, like that. Okay. So for this tutorial, the JavaScript we're going to be writing is all going to happen on load of the document. So as soon as, and it will not be triggered by some other event. That is for next week's tutorial. Okay. So if we go back to our page, the one that we haven't done anything on yet, and we press F5, then you can see that JavaScript code just runs immediately. Alright, so we know our JavaScript is working and that we actually do have the HTML is linking up properly with the JavaScript. Okay, so let's have a think at our first instruction, which is to color code the price cells that are above 500,000 Rand. So the way we want to do this is to actually go and get all of the price cells. So the price cells are these elements. So if we go and inspect that, these elements, and once we go and get that through our JavaScript, we can actually loop through it and for each one check what is the price, and if the price is greater than 500,000 Rand, we change it to we change the color property of that cell to red. So it sounds simple enough. Let's get started. So just as a starting point, what I've already gone to do that you also would need to do is to go and add a class price cell to each of the price data cells in your HTML document, and that is so that we can use a selector to point to all these cells through the class name. Right, and let's just do that right now. So we're just going to go var for a to declare a variable, we're going to call it price cells, and then the way you access HTML elements in the through your JavaScript is by making use of something called the DOM, the document object model. We talk a little bit more in detail about that next week, but this is the notation. You go document.getElement by. So here are the methods. If you type it in Visual Studio Code and it recognizes it as JavaScript, it shows you the available methods of the document object, and that is getElement by ID. You'll use this method if you would want to get an element by its specific ID. So if you want to get one element. The other one is getElements by class name, getElements by name, which is the attribute name, getElements by tag name, so that is get all P tags or get all H2 tags or so on, and then getElements by tag name namespace. Okay, so in this case we want to get all elements that have a certain class, and that class is price cells, price cell. All right, and that should return an array of all the elements that have the class price cell. So all the elements that have this attribute will be returned. So if we save that, another thing that I would just like to show you that will be very useful, and you'll use this a lot when you code in JavaScript, is the console.log method. So in this case, I'm going to output price cell, caps lock, price cells dot length. If I then go back to my HTML and I open up my console, so console is the way you open is like developers tools. It's web developers can open the developer tool portal in a web browser. Most web browsers have a developer's tool option. In Google Chrome, the way you open it is by right-click, inspect, or as you can see here, the Control-Shift-I shortcut. So if you go Control-Shift-I, it'll open the console. And here you can see, if we refresh again, I'll just show you that the 12 output has been shown in our console, and there you can see where it comes from. So if we click there, it shows console.log price cells.length. Okay. So that the 12 is what we expect because we have 12 cells that have prices in, and it's going to go and retrieve all of those, and therefore the length is as we expect it to be. Okay, the following thing we want to do is to actually loop through them. The way we do that is with a for loop. So as the case is in C#, you have to declare a variable so that you can keep track of the index, and that index is less than price cells length, and it increments after every loop. Okay, so then what we want to do in each of these is to actually compare the price that is contained within each cell to 500,000 Rand, and if it's greater than 500,000 Rand, then we change the color to red. But at the moment, the content will be retrieved as text. So you can actually go console.log car. Let's just add index there. We add a colon space. And then we go price cells I index dot text content. So that will return the text inside of that cell. Alternatively, you can also return inner HTML that will actually return the HTML, the markup that is inside of this element. But we just want to return the text. In this case, the HTML and the text will be the same. Okay, so if we go back and we refresh, then here you can see we have our 12 cars and the text of each of those 12 cells. Now, to compare each of these to 500,000, we have a bit of a problem, and that is that this JavaScript interprets this as string. Because you asked for the text content, number one, but also because it's got a character R and a comma character there, JavaScript will interpret this as string, and therefore when you compare this to 500,000 Rand, you're going to get unexpected results. So what we need to do is to actually parse this value into a number. So JavaScript has built-in functions for that, to parse a string value that contains something that can be converted into a number. It will actually convert, but this is actually not, this string as it is currently cannot be parsed into a number because of the R character and the comma. So let's just fix that by removing the R and all instances of the comma. Okay, so if we just comment that out, I'm just going to start out with getting the text. So that will be price cells index dot text content. Then we have text in the text variable. You can then go without R. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to try and do is to remove the R. String variables have a built-in set of methods in JavaScript. So if I go text dot, you can see a whole bunch of methods being listed out here if you are coding in Visual Studio Code. One way you can do that is to use the substr method. And what that says, or what that requires, is a index and a length, and then it will return the string or the set of characters from a specified index for a specified length. So if we do it from 1, and this is a 0, it starts counting from 0, so if we start at 1, it will literally cut off the first character, and then if we specify the length as text.length -1, the -1 is there because if we just do text.length, then it will go out of bounds. Because we're doing it from 1, we need to say -1 there to make sure that it doesn't go out of bounds. Okay. So let me just console.log that to make sure we have what we want. And what we want to output there is without R. If I refresh that, then you can see the R has been removed everywhere. Okay, so this was easy enough because the substring works perfectly for something that you want to remove from the end or from the beginning of a string. But how do you do that if there's something in the middle of the string? So what you could do is to actually split the text with a particular character, like the comma, and then afterwards append all of them together again. But there's also an easier way to do so, and that is without commas. Let me just text.replace. So let's say we're going to replace comma, and we want to replace it with something that's empty, so it will literally take the comma and replace it with nothing. So in that sense, remove the comma. Okay, let me log that out. So here you can see the comma has been removed, but yeah, if you look at car number 3, we have a slight problem. Here you can see originally it had 2 commas and it's only gone to remove the first one. So the problem with this dot replace is if you only provide it with this comma, then it will only go and remove the first instance and not all instances. So the way to fix this, you can still use the replace function, but you have to use it with something called a regular expression. Now, regular expression is not really within the scope of this week. We didn't really talk about it, but I would like to show you an example of how you can use a regular expression because it's really powerful. So I just want to guide you to the W3 Schools page where they specifically have a section on regular expressions. And here they state that a regular expression is an object that describes a pattern of characters. Okay, and regular expressions are used to perform pattern matching and search and replace functions on text. So this is exactly what we want to do. Okay, a regular expression consists of a pattern and a modifier. Okay, and a pattern is something that's to be used in a search, so it will search for that pattern. If this is the pattern, it will search for this, and this is a modifier, like a rule that you place on the pattern. So with I, the rule is case insensitive, so it can be a big W or a small w, it doesn't matter, it will return both of those instances. The G refers to a global match, meaning find all matches rather than stopping after the first match, and this should ring a bell. This is what we're looking for. So if we go back to our script, let me show you how we can actually do this. So if we go new, so instead of the comma we have new regular expression, and we say we're looking for a comma, that's the pattern, comma, and we give it the modifier G to say it should be a global match, and then that pattern, everywhere it finds that pattern, it will then replace with an empty character or an empty value, nothing. And if we now save and go back, now you can see the second comma has also been removed. Alright, the only problem now is the R was back, so we should actually just take so let me just go through that again. The text takes the text content from the cell. Without R, uses text and only takes the everything but the first character of the text, and that gives us the text without the R symbol. And then without comma applies a regular expression and looks for all instances of a comma and replaces it with nothing. And then we have without comma. If we then save that, then we see we have the value in the form that we want. So now the last thing to do, it's still theoretically a string, so the last thing we need to do is to actually go and say actual price equals parse float, which will convert it into a number. So JavaScript forces this value to be a number, otherwise it will throw an error if it cannot be converted into a number. And we give it the without comma text. Okay, and now we can go and log out that value, and if you refresh there, that is actually the actual price values. You can't really see the difference except that the decimals have fallen away, but that's not a big deal. But now we know that JavaScript will perceive this as a number. Yeah, if you hover over it in Visual Studio Code, it even shows you that it is a number. Right, now finally we can get to the point where we want to compare. So here we go, if, just like you used to in C#, if actual price is greater than 500,000, then we want to change the cell's color property to red. Now there's many ways you can do this. I'm going to show you one of the ways. So that is price cells. Now you want to use the element again, price cells at index. So you can use things like .set attribute, but I want to use .style and .color and set that to red. Oops. This we don't need anymore. We're done with console. If I save that, refresh, and you scroll down, then we have the values in red, the ones that are more expensive than 500,000 Rand. Perfect. That is the first task done. Let us look at the second one. So the second task is calculate the average price of each of the sections. So again, we're going to need to go and access the price cells like we did in the previous one, but in this case we can't just go and access all of the price cells. We need to split it into the different sections. So we first want to access each of the sections, and for each of those sections we go and access the price cells. So we start out with, let's just look at our HTML to see what our JavaScript needs to actually go and look for. So each of our sections has a class called section, and we can access each of those sections through the get elements by class method in the JavaScript. So let's go and do that. We say sections, and we then start with a document.getElements by class name, and this time we say section. In JavaScript, it doesn't really matter if you use single or double quotes. So as long as you obviously use them on both sides. So if you use the double quote at the start, then it needs to be a double quote at the back as well. Alright, so that should return a list of sections, and then This is nothing new. We did that at the top with the price cells, and then we're going to loop through that. I'm going to call it var I less than sections.length, and we want to go I plus plus. Alright, so now that we have the section, we want to find all of the price cells within that section. So then we go var section prices equals. So you can actually, instead of using document, you can use an element and look within that element. So if I go sections I dot get elements by class name, you'll see that the notation is the same as this, where you look through the entire document to look for elements by class name. Now you're looking within a particular element to find other elements by class. So to find class child elements within that element that have a particular class. And we want to say price cell, just like we did at the top there. I also want to declare a sum variable that I initialize to the value of 0. And this is because we're working out an average. So I'm going to add each of the values within the price cell to the sum, and at the end I'm going to divide it by the number of price cells that I have within a particular section. Okay, so now I need to obviously use a different variable name, j less than section prices dot length and j plus plus. Right, so here you can see it's our second for. Now I'm actually going to do, we have to do the same thing for the same reason that we had previously. Those price cells don't have the values as we want them, so we would actually like to convert it to a number and do all the things that we did up here, except I am now going to do that all in one line, just to make the code slightly cleaner. So we're going to start with a parse float. We want to parse float the section prices j. Okay, so that's the cell value, text content. We want to actually remove the first character, and that is for the length -1. So text content dot length -1. Okay, so that gives us the value without the r, and then we want to replace that all the commas. For that we need a regular expression. Okay, in the regular expression we're going to look for the comma pattern, and we want to apply that as a global match, and we want to replace that with an empty value. Okay, so let's just go and see if our actual price looks the way we want it to look using the console. Log. If I then go and refresh, oops, regex is not defined. That's what it should be. Regional expression, exp. That's the object. And there we go. These are all the actual prices. Right. So even though it looks the same, the outer four did these three, and these three, and these three. So it did it in groups of 3. What we want to do with this is say sum plus equals, so it takes the value of sum and adds the actual price to that. Okay, and once it's gone through all of the sections prices, Then outside of that, then the for will finish. So if the length, if there's 3 different price cells, then it will, this inner loop will iterate 3 times, and then it will break out of the for, and then we'll have the total sum. And then what we want to do is to get the average, we have to take the sum value and divide that by the section prices dot length, so the number of prices in that particular section, and that will give you the average. But when you divide, you can obviously have a lot of decimal places, so there's again a built-in function for number types, which if you code in Visual Studio Code, it gives it to you as suggestions. So I'm going to use the toFixed one, which is basically a rounding function. It rounds it to 2 decimal places, and there we go. Alright, so I'm just going to log that out to make sure we have the values before we try and go and put the value into the header. So I'm just going to say section plus I plus colon plus average. If I save that, refresh it, then here we have the averages. Alright, so now we have the actual average values, which we calculated by going to look in each section, what are the prices of each of the vehicles within that section, adding it all together, dividing it by the count or the number of cars in each section, and then we got the average. So now we want to go and actually add it in. If you look at our planned solution, you want to actually go and add it in next to the header. Alright, so if we go to our HTML, we can actually see that we have a class. Each header has a class called section header, and we can then actually use, if you recall, the get elements by class name function to access these elements and modify them. So let's go and do that. We don't need the console anymore, so section, so we're looking in that particular section that we're busy with, dot get elements by class name. We look for the section header class, and in this case, theoretically get elements by class name could return multiple classes, but in this case we know that each section only has one class with a section header, or it's supposed to be that way, so we're going to assume that it's that way. So if we actually just take the first value in the array that gets returned by the get elements by class name method, we assume that that should be our section header. Alright, then we say that section header has an inner HTML, and we want to go and add to the inner HTML. Notice that I use the plus equals notation and not just the equal. If we just use equal, then whatever we write there, we're going to overwrite the inner HTML. If I do the plus equals, then we actually append to the inner HTML. Okay, so what do we want to append? If we go and look at our planned solution, we want a square bracket, and inside of that average price, and that should be in blue, and then the actual average should be in pink. So if you recall, we can use span, and the reason I want to use span is because we can actually then specify styles to the text that we're about to insert here. So I can go and add a span, and I can say style equals, okay, in this case, because I used double quotations outside, I need to use single quotations inside. And there I go and say color, and in this case the color that I used You can use any one, but it was 42A5 F5. Okay, and let me just close that span, make sure I've got valid HTML, and then I do my open and closing bracket, and I go average price space, and now this following section I want in a different color as well, so then I do the span again, and I go style equals single quote color. This color was EC407A. Let's just close the span, and inside of that we actually go and put an R to just get that R back, and then we add our average in there. Okay, so we've got a span within a span, and then we specify colors within that, but if you carefully look through it, then everything should make sense to you. Okay, I go to our work in progress and I refresh there, just close the console, not logging anything anymore. There we go. Just notice I forgot to put a space between, so in the final solution I've got a space. So to fix that, I can just go back there, add a space, come here, refresh. There we go. So that's it for the tutorial today. I hope it helps you and gets you started with some JavaScript, and you can definitely look further into JavaScript and see what more you can do with it. But that's it for this tutorial. Have fun, guys. Cheers.